Welcome back, everybody, to A Foggy Day on Olympus and to the second episode in our series on the crisis-filled 20th century events of Hungary.
Yes, this is the place, this is the channel where, as ever, we eschew easy ideology-driven analysis and confirmation bias. If you're watching, congratulations. Reality was as complicated and confounding in the past as it is right now. And our aim is to take you into that, shake the easy certainties and the special pleading on behalf of your cherished beliefs out of you and confront the absolute mess that is reality.
Speaking of, my name is Rosalind Kalata Sedra, and you're who again?
Something like Mike Pierce?
Right. I think I heard that somewhere around my third coffee.
Okay, good.
Let's jump in.
Yep.
Trianon is a palace in the grounds of Versailles outside Paris. And it's where the treaty was signed in 1920 that formally carved up the Habsburg Empire, including Hungary.
Yes, and we've got a poster here saying Nem Socha, no, never, below a map of dismembered Hungary. There was universal rage in the country right across the political spectrum at the Treaty of Trianon that was imposed on the Austro-Hungarian Empire as a whole and carved up Hungary in particular.
And Hungary is as Central Europe gets.
Yes, it is. And this picture here was taken by yours truly in Budapest in 2022.
Trianon is not engraved in stone, and this is 2022. That's 102 years later. People are protesting this treaty.
Yes, they are. Yes. One wonders whether these folks are planning to invade Slovakia, Transylvania, Vojvodina, and Croatia to get them all back into Hungary. At the time the treaty was made, there was universal rage, and that was pretty much everybody in interwar Hungary remained angry about this. I suspect that these protesters in 2022 are part now simply of a small fringe, although, and again, I'm no expert on this, I'm sure plenty of Hungarian viewers will comment below the
I
post
hope so.
in
Please
YouTube.
do.
Yes, please do. I suspect that even now, most Hungarians, however gently they might express the opinion, would at least prefer some of these territories to be returned to Hungary, particularly in the case of Transylvania, which to this day has a sizable Hungarian population. Yes. Right, so I was going to
Oh,
make.
how did that happen?
I
I'm
don't know. I can't imagine really.
I must have just been lost.
That was it. You have to be pretty lost to bump into me anywhere, let alone in
In
Budapest.
Budapest.
Yeah. So 2022. Okay, so here we have a poster. We will rise again. And note the T turned into a cross
Is
there.
that God being invoked there with the cross for the T?
I suspect it is. I don't think it's any louder than that T being turned into a cross, but it's definitely there. Yeah. So this is
What
part of
does
a
that
traveling.
mean, invoking God? Like God, help us to rise?
Yes, something like that. And Christian Hungary, this kind of stuff. The sort of rhetoric that Orban has been throwing around over the last 16 years or so. So, yeah, it's a traveling exhibition denouncing the Treaty of 1920, which, as we said, enormously reduced Hungary's size. And here in this next slide, we have a book in German that is being touted by the people running the exhibition. And the title means Trianon, Attempted Murder of a Nation. I think we can just about discern the line that our author is going to take.
I think so. Pre First World War Hungary was a lot bigger than post. And this is what the author is saying was
Right.
taken away by Trianon.
Right.
Okay.
And we've got a map here illustrating that.
Wow. Okay, it's like half the size.
Yes, or even less, actually. Yeah.
So the area that was left as Hungary proper after the Treaty of Trianon is just the bit in green, and the area from before the First World War is the whole area in purple.
Yes.
This is what is being complained about even in 2022 by these protesters you took a
Yes.
photo of?
Yes, that's right. That's what's going on there. The area in red is the Austrian-run half of the empire. Well, that's not strictly true of Bosnia, of course, which was in. We're not going to get into that. Anyway, yes, but we get the general idea. Okay, so to understand this, we need to look back at the First World War. In fact, in a moment, we're going to look back a little further than that. But Hungary, as part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, had been heavily involved in World War I from 1914 to 18, the end of which brought about the end of that empire.
Just to remind viewers who was fighting whom in World War One. We're not digging into the causes or the military course of the war, just who was whom.
Right, because if we started to get into that, this episode would be going on for hours and hours, and we have got things to say about that in other contexts. We're just going to remind people here of the combatant sides, so to speak. So we've got Germany, Austria-Hungary, and from the later part of 1914 onwards, the Ottoman Empire, and from 1915, Bulgaria on one side, and then Britain, France, and Russia, and Serbia, of course, which had been pretty much ground zero for the start of the conflict on the other, with Italy joining on their side in 1915, and Romania likewise, and Greece coming in even later in 1917. So those are the main powers. Well, not to offend any Portuguese who might be watching, Portugal was fighting on the side of the Allies as well. So the central powers are Germany, Austria-Hungary, and the Ottomans. The Triple Entente, the original Triple Entente, had been Britain, France, and Russia. Now, we need to look back a little here because Hungary, by participating in this war, was engaged in something while mistrusting half of its own population. And I'm taking a quotation here from a fairly recent book by Victor Sebastien about Budapest and its history. And he says this: the main weakness of the dual monarchy being Austria-Hungary, the emperor, Franz Joseph being emperor in Austria and king of Hungary, had always been that it was predicated on the suppression of a voice for the Slavs. The Hungarians in their part of the empire were allowed to dominate all their nationalities.
So all their nationalities, this is referring back to the Compromise of 1867 that we discussed in the last episode, where, okay, the empire would be governed in two halves, and Austria would run the half from Vienna, and Hungary would run the half from Budapest, yes?
Yes, and so please, everybody, if you haven't seen that episode, do go back and take a look at it. So this compromise we call the Ausgleich, and it completely restructures the empire. However intricate and superficially clever the dual system seemed, this was a truth never seriously addressed. It was untenable for any length of time and was unlikely to withstand any major crisis like our World War. Designed to accommodate nationalism in one place, Hungary, dualism was too fragile to withstand other nationalisms elsewhere. The national consciousness that had driven the Hungarian 1848 revolution, which we also discussed in the previous episode, was growing fast among Slovaks, Croats, Serbs, and Romanians in the Magyar domains.
Wasn't there already an independent Serbia and an independent Romania? I mean, why didn't that solve the issue?
Well, there certainly was an independent Serbia and an independent Romania by that point, but the governments of those countries coveted territories outside their frontiers, inside Austria-Hungary, that had their co-nationals, let us say, because as we've discussed at length in the previous episode, this empire was multi-ethnic. So many Romanians believed that Transylvania and the Banat should be theirs. Serbia had eyes on Vojvodina, which had a lot of Hungarians, also had a lot of Serbs. So the compromise, the Ausgleich of 1867, didn't change these realities. It made them sharper because it solidified Hungarian rule. The minorities who lived in Hungary had no rights of self-government at all. The so-called liberals in Hungary were as blind as the reactionaries in this area. And as for the left, they were concerned with better conditions for workers, not nationalist dreams among Slovaks. So socialists are looking for class solidarity, not national solidarity. Prime Minister Kalman Tisa declared in 1875 that there can be only one viable nation within the frontiers of Hungary, that is the Hungarian one. And he intervened in a court case in eastern Hungary, Transylvania, to forbid the use of Romanian in local schools. And his later successor as Prime Minister, Deja Banff, declared in 1891 that Hungary was a unified national state and it cannot tolerate political parties on the basis of nationality. He forbade the use of place names in two languages, even on railway station signs in Croatia. Augustin Trefort, Minister for Religious Affairs and Education, in the 1870s and 80s declared, "I do not wish to enforce Magyarization on anybody. However, in Hungary, the state can survive only as a Magyar one. The aspirations towards a polyglot status are politically crude and short work has to be made of them."
So this is a complete contradiction.
Right.
And it's hypocritical too, right? I mean, if you're going to, on the one hand, say we're not enforcing, what is Magyarization?
Well, Magyarization is Hungarianization, making Hungarian language absolutely normative in all aspects of public and eventually private life, assimilating non-Hungarian populations to Hungarianism.
So then, on the one hand, are they playing like a victim card in terms of the Austrians?
Yes, that was what had been behind the 1848 revolution. We are mistreated by Austria. We should have our own say. We should run our own affairs and so on. Yeah.
But on the other hand, it's total hypocrisy to forcibly homogenize all non-Hungarians under their control, like stripping away languages.
Right. I mean, is this quite racism? They think other races are inferior, but not intrinsically inferior. They just need to be made Hungarian.
So more inferior by custom and behavior and culture.
Yes. I mean, it has to be said in some mitigation that in this part of the world, I speak to you from Croatia, everybody tends to look down on the peoples to their south and east. I'm afraid that trait is very unattractive and very hard to eradicate.
Does that account for the anti-Semitism that was prevalent at the time?
Well, it wouldn't. That wouldn't account for it, but there was pretty serious anti-Semitism. Yes.
In Hungary or all
Yes.
over Europe?
Everywhere, and in America as well. It was all over. And this is something we talk about at length in our very first series in A Foggy Day on Olympus, just exactly how prevalent anti-Semitism was everywhere. Now, Hungarians will tell you that Jews played a much larger part in public life in Hungary, and many Jews felt more free to be themselves there than they did in very many other places. And in a sense, both of those things were true. Right? A quarter of the population of Budapest before World War I was Jewish, and the anti-Semitic mayor of Vienna scornfully referred to the city as Juda Pest, which is basically German for a plague of Jews. Right? So that was true, but that did not mean that there wasn't very serious anti-Semitism. So a really well-known and much admired public figure and writer like Count Miklos Palfi, for example, whose writings are still read today very widely, actually refused to enter a Jewish house. He wouldn't meet the Prince of Wales, who was visiting, because he was staying at a Jewish house, and this Hungarian count would not go into the house. So yeah, there's all that stuff going on.
Austria-Hungary loses the First World War, and there's massive instability. And then what? Then we have the rise and fall of how many regimes in Hungary within a couple of years?
Yeah. Within about 18 months, there are 5 different regimes. If I'm living in Hungary, well, exactly what Hungary is a little disputed. Let's say I'm living in Budapest, right? Up to October 30th, 1918, I'm in the Kingdom of Hungary, which is part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And the next day, there's a mostly peaceful revolution because the Central Powers are collapsing militarily now. It's the end of the First World War. It's coming rapidly to an end anyway. And the king of Hungary, of course, is the same person as the Emperor of Austria, Karl. He appointed the Social Democrat, Count Michael Károly, as prime minister. And that portends very big changes in itself. You know, he is well to the left. I've liked to quip in an earlier series that in the early part of the 20th century, a social democrat was essentially a Marxist who didn't actually want to kill you. Well, just over 2 weeks later, the monarchy is formally abolished and the Hungarian People's Republic is established with Károly as president. But 4 or 5 months after that, that is overthrown by a communist revolution, and the Hungarian Soviet Republic under Béla Kun emerges. And about 5 months later, that is in turn ousted by Romanian troops. And so the Hungarian Republic is restored as it had been before. And in March 1920, monarchy is restored, but without a monarch, which is very odd. And
How do you do how do you restore monarchy without a monarch?
By a strange sort of legal fiction. And this was the situation that obtained right the way down to 1944. We'll say a little bit more about it in a moment. But Admiral Miklos Horthy takes over as regent.
But there was a king available, right?
Yeah, there was. And we'll see exactly what happened with him in just a moment. Let's just spend a little more time on some of these fleeting regimes. Here we've got a picture of Count Michael Károly, second from the left there, distributing his lands to his peasants. His government was extremely ineffectual. He was the classic caricature of a very wealthy left-winger, right, who had high ideals but no real conception of how ordinary people lived, and certainly none at all of how to run a country. His cabinet has been described as a debating club, and it was easily blown away by the communists the following March 1919. Okay, so here we're just serving notice that we're beginning looking for a couple of minutes at Red Hungary and the backlash to it.
But before we dive too deeply in there, we need to remember that the Bolshevik Revolution had happened in Russia in 1917.
Yes, and this shook many people right around the world. And the Bolsheviks were, in fact, determined to spread their revolution, to make it worldwide. There were several attempts in different countries. We can't look at them now. 1919 was, in general, the year of the Red Scare in Britain and in America, and many other countries had it far worse than Britain and America. In Hungary, a revolution actually happened that year, but it did not endure. Here we've got a picture of Béla Kun. He'd Hungarianized his name from Kohn. He had a Jewish background. He was born in a village in what's now northern Romania. He'd fought in the Austro-Hungarian army in World War I and had been captured by the Russians in 1916. And so while he's a prisoner of war, he's in a country that experiences a communist revolution in 1917. And he returned to Hungary in November 1918, intent on creating a revolution there. That's very, very similar biographically to Tito in what would become Yugoslavia. So here we have Béla Kun as the head of a Hungarian Soviet revolution, just within 4 months of arriving back home. And it lasts from March to August 1919. After it was overthrown, he'd spent the last 19 years of his life in the Soviet Union, where he was executed in one of Stalin's purges.
Why?
Well, loads and loads of foreign communists, in particular, who had taken refuge in the Soviet Union, ended up being executed in the purges of 1937 to 38, as indeed were a load of Soviets. Stalin essentially wanted the party in his own country, but also the foreign communist parties, to be made absolutely in his image, and all their leaders to owe their position and indeed their lives to him. So rather a lot of foreign communists in exile in the Soviet Union suffered the same fate at this time. Well, here's a crowd that's turned out in Budapest for the proclamation of the Bolshevik government in Hungary in March 1919. And a poster, "Into the Red Army," recruiting a new army to defend the revolution.
Why do they need a new army? People didn't want communism in Hungary?
Well, we don't know what opinion polls were. There were significant numbers of people who did want it, but probably even more that didn't, especially out in the countryside. And so the Reds from the beginning felt under threat, although what finally brought them down wasn't so much an internal threat as an external one, as we'll see in a moment. But before we get to that, here we have József Pogany, one of the communist leaders, exhorting civilians in Heroes Square in Pest, the Pest side of Budapest, to enlist in the Red Army. And rather like Béla Kun in 1938, he'd suffer the same fate, being executed in a Soviet purge. We've got a picture here of battalions of newly enlisted volunteers parading in the streets, and they look a little bit like a raggle-taggle militia. And communist troops here in the city in 1919, and another one of the same sort of stuff. This shows us Béla Kun in the center, in the black coat and hat there, in Budapest on May Day.
So, May Day, North Americans would think of it as Labor Day, the workers' holiday?
A workers' holiday in very many countries, and of course, very important to communists, yes. And here we've got Heroes Square again, and it's covered with communist symbols for May Day. And at the base of the original obelisk, a new statue was erected of Karl Marx, with a worker and a peasant. And the statues of historic heroes were toppled. Hungarian national symbols were banned in the name of workers' internationalism.
So it's a classic example of class identity opposing national identity.
Yes, yes. Think of the closing sentence of the Communist Manifesto: working men of all countries unite. In other words, what matters, what binds you together, is that you are working men, not your
Working
country.
class.
Yeah, working class. That's right. Yes. Well, this shows Josef Czerny and his Lenin boys. They conducted a Red Terror, breaking up religious meetings with hand grenades and rifle butts. They killed several hundred enemies of the regime.
Working men, working class men, Lenin boys. Where were women in all this? Were women just included as part of the lot?
I think most of the action, and certainly pretty much 100% of the violence, is going to be coming from the men. Yes, but certainly there were plenty of women included in the movement. Yeah.
So the Red Terror killed the enemies of the regime. How did the scale compare to what was happening in Russia at the time?
Well, compared to what was happening in Russia, it was fairly mild. I mean, that sounds a bad thing to say when several hundred people have been killed, but what was happening in Russia was on a totally different scale. In the Russian Civil War, as many people died as in World War One on all sides put together. So we're talking about 9 or 10 million people. Now, obviously, the Reds themselves didn't kill all of those. The Whites killed a load as well, but that's something we'll look at in an upcoming series in a few months. But still, it was pretty serious. Yes. Okay, and here we've got some demonstrations in Slovakia proclaiming a Slovak Soviet Republic. Slovakia, remember, had been Upper Hungary for many hundreds of years, and Czechoslovakia was just being formed as a new state. But there was an attempt to create a Slovak Soviet Republic, and mercifully, it lasted just 3 weeks. But here we've got a map of what was going on. It shows us the whole of traditional Hungary, so to speak. And the area in deep red there is the area actually controlled by Béla Kun's regime. The area in pink, the attempt of the Slovak Soviet Republic. The area in blue was being taken by a vastly expanded Serbia in what would become Yugoslavia. And the area in brown is where Romanian troops are pushing in.
So Romania wanted to annex Transylvania, which already had a big Romanian population. Transylvania had been part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and it came out of World War I on the downside. But Romania as a country wanted to push as far north and west as they could.
Right, and the British and the French were giving them a nudge and a wink, because although they didn't necessarily want an overmighty Romania or for Hungary to disappear completely, they certainly didn't want another communist regime in Europe. They were worried enough about what was going on in Russia. So on the back of that, the Romanians felt that they had kind of permission from the great powers to keep pushing on. But of course, this was exactly the problem with all of these nationalisms, that they all claimed the same territory and made ridiculous self-serving arguments.
And they could legitimately all say, our people live here. This is our homeland. We've been here for centuries.
Yes, I mean, those arguments could be made legitimately by both Romanians and Hungarians in respect of Transylvania. They couldn't really be made for some of the territories that the Romanian army was pushing into now. It was pushing its luck. Although, to be entirely fair, I mean, they no more wanted a communist state on their northwest frontier than the British and French wanted one anywhere. So they just kept pushing on in 1919. And here we've got Romanian cavalry finally arriving in Budapest in the summer of that year, and some Romanian soldiers in Budapest.
So if I'm this fairly middle class looking woman here in white, I'm going to be jumping out of my skin right about now because on the one hand, I will be desperately grateful that the Reds, the communists, have been overthrown, right?
Yep.
But on the other hand, I would feel sick that it has been at the hands of the Romanians because all the teaching that children would have received in that time would be to look down on Romanians as backward inferiors.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's a harrowing experience for Hungarians. Yes, completely disorientating. Not only is the empire that they've known all their lives no longer in existence, not only is Hungary being cut up into bits, but the bit that's left of them has been dominated by Reds, and now apparently they're going to be spared at least that. But the downside is in come the Romanians to do the throwing out. It's really, really turbulent few years. Yeah. And a few months up the road, this man, Admiral Miklos Horthy, enters Budapest to try and restore order. He comes in at the head of a Hungarian national army in November 1919.
So we're going to be talking a lot about him in the next episode, but just for now, briefly, do you think you could manage a brief?
Yeah, well, we're going to say more about him in this episode too for a few minutes, but yeah, next episode too. Briefly, he, as his title would suggest, had been admiral. Well, Hungary doesn't even have a coastline right now, but he'd been admiral in the Austro-Hungarian Navy and based in Pula, at the north of the Adriatic, running Austro-Hungarian naval forces. Well, clearly he could be out of a job right now. There not being really a navy needed. But he does.
Rather than be out of a job, he just takes over the country.
Well, something like that. Yeah, that's a slightly caricature version, but it's not a million miles from the truth. That's right. He's a military man, and as in so many of these unstable situations, somebody senior military takes over, and that was him. So what follows is the White Terror coming on the heels of the Red Terror. And it's perpetrated by some army units, and arguments can go on as to what extent Horthy was responsible for all of this. We're not diving into those now. During 1919 to 21, and about 5,000 to 10,000 people were killed, so a lot more than the Reds killed, and another 100,000 fled the country.
Who was killing these thousands and why? And
well, all we can say for sure is that some of Horthy's army units were doing this. They were killing communists and suspected communists. Suspected communists will have included quite a few Jews. There will have been outlets for anti-Semitic violence because in everybody's minds, not just in Hungary, well, it was statistically true that the Jews everywhere were overrepresented in communist parties relative to their strength in the population as a whole. And that association was there in most people's minds. So there's a whole load of people who were vulnerable to this. And another 100,000 people, as we've said, decided that the safest course of action was to get out of the country.
Then we get on to Trianon, yes?
Well, to Trianon, Hungary, yes.
All right. So before we jump into this whole chapter, let me just pause. Viewers, if you sometimes find the complexities of history as confusing as I do, and find this sort of guided tour helpful and interesting, please subscribe, share on all your socials, repost the link.
Yes, please. We really do rely on that to help grow this podcast.
Okay, on we go.
Okay, well, here we have the arrival of August Benar and Alfred Rasha Lazar, the two Hungarian signatories, in Paris on 4th of June 1920 at the Grand Trianon Palace. Very, very unwilling signators, as their German predecessors had been in Versailles the previous year.
Again, unwilling because
They
the
have no
Trianon
choice.
created a mini Hungary
Because
after
it's
the
creating a
First
mini
World War.
Hungary, and nobody in Hungary, or no Hungarians, want this, right? And it's felt to be excessively punitive, but there is simply nothing they can do. So these two poor unfortunates are the ones who have to carry the can and go there and sign the wretched piece of paper. Yes.
Well, why did anyone think this was a good idea? Why did the victor powers after the First World War think that carving up Hungary, or the former empire as it had been, was a wise move?
Well, for that, we need to look perhaps first to President Woodrow Wilson and his big idea of what he called national self-determination. Now, this became a buzz phrase during the peace conferences in this period. And the idea was that it was nationalism that had caused World War One, which really it had, if we think back to, say, the assassination of Franz Ferdinand and his wife in Sarajevo in 1914, and the enthusiastic participation in conflict of so many countries. And so the idea was that if we redraw the map of Europe so that every nation has its own state and every state consists essentially of people from that nation, there can't be wars for the future. The First World War was supposed to be, remember, the war to end all wars.
But this assumes that nations all live in one clump and don't live anywhere else.
Right. I mean, it's an absolute non-starter right across Central and Eastern Europe. There is nowhere that you could draw the boundaries that would reflect those ideas. I mean, the accusation made at the time and by many people since is, oh, the boundaries were drawn in all the wrong places. The point I'd want to make is you've set yourself a totally impossible task here, to which all answers are stupid. Therefore, the question is stupid.
So there was no place to draw these boundaries that would have been
satisfactory to most people and wouldn't have left millions and millions of aggrieved parties and have left fuel lying around for resentful nationalisms, resentful either of the national minorities within one's own state or the insistence that territories just outside your frontiers should really belong to your state and all the rest of it.
But nobody who was actually affected by these arbitrarily drawn boundaries had any bargaining power to change what was happening.
No, they didn't really. No. And it was one of many things that contributed towards massive economic decline in the interwar periods. This is one of the things that people often don't think about, people who are otherwise well informed on this. If you are, let's just make this up, but just to give an example, if you are a manufacturer running your own factory in, I don't know, southern Hungary, and you're importing a load, or you're not importing, you're just bringing a load of your raw material before World War One from somewhere in Croatia, and loads of your buyers are in Galicia and Transylvania. Well, there's not going to be any import or export duties. It's all within one state. But once that empire has been carved up into loads of different states, then all of this becomes totally problematic. Your business is simply going to be non-viable, right? Whether it's in terms of transport links, bringing your raw materials or most of your customers. At best, your business might survive at a fraction of its previous size. And this is the reality right across East Central Europe during the whole of the interwar period. It's just a disaster. So on the map here, the area in pale green is the new mini Hungary, which is the same as today's Hungary, actually. And lost to it is Slovakia, which is a little bit longer there. It's now part of the new country of Czechoslovakia, but at the tail end on the right, it includes Ruthenia, which now is part of Ukraine. And then in the east and southeast, it's Transylvania and the Banat, which is now given to Romania, one of the victor powers in World War I. To the immediate south is Vojvodina, which includes also a lot of ethnic Hungarians, but it's now given to Serbia as part of the new state of Yugoslavia. Croatia, nothing like as many ethnic Hungarians, but the same. And even a few territories in the west there go to Austria. So, yeah, massive resentment.
All right, so back to the man who's leading Hungary through this transition.
Yeah, Admiral Miklos Horthy, and he was in charge for 24 years.
So was he a dictator?
A very soft dictator. There was some democracy, there were elections to parliament, but Horthy generally got to choose who would be in the government, but he also had to be swayed by public opinion as expressed through elections. So it was a bit of a mixture. He was, let us say, the guiding hand.
Why would he be subject to elections if he was regent? What was meant by regent?
Well, it's not a hard dictatorship. It's a soft one. So
Okay.
there is a place for public opinion.
Doesn't regent suggest you're representing a monarch?
Yes. So this was officially the Kingdom of Hungary, even though there wasn't a king. Now, I know that sounds totally bizarre.
Nonsensical.
Well, arguably so. This man, Charles IV, had become Emperor of Austria-Hungary in November 1916, so halfway through World War I, when his great-uncle, Franz Josef, had finally died at the immense age of 86. And so he became Charles I of Austria and Charles IV of Hungary in the dual monarchy. But of course, that's then destroyed by the end of World War I. And in the new situation, he twice attempted to return to Hungary as king in 1921.
He was a fascinating figure because he tried to end World War I early, or at least to pull Hungary out of it, didn't he?
Yes, that was what he did. Well, to try and bring the Austro-Hungarian Empire, because he was emperor at the time. Yes, he made peace overtures, particularly to France. It all had to be kept really secret. But he was totally stymied because essentially the military top brass were in charge in the empire by that point. They had more control over day-to-day events and policy like this than he did. And also his German allies would never allow Austria-Hungary to pull out of the alliance or to pull out of the war. They would have attempted to take over the empire themselves before they would let that happen. So he simply couldn't bring it about. But he really, really did want peace.
So why did he try to come back to a kingdom where his throne was being essentially used by someone else and the military had removed any real decision-making power he had? Why did he try, and why was he not able to come back?
Well, even at the end of World War I, he didn't formally abdicate. He simply, quote, withdrew from politics. So that leaves his situation rather ambiguous, and he's in exile. But he wanted to come back at least to Hungary to try and reign actually as king there. Well, Why did he not succeed? Miklos Horthy, in his autobiography, and of course all autobiographies are attempts at self-vindication, said that he had to stop him from doing that because the Western allies would simply have invaded Hungary. Horthy's detractors and defenders of Karl or Charles might say, well, Horthy just liked having the power for himself. Now, again, I'm not in a position to adjudicate in that discussion, but that is the discussion, right? Did Horthy just want to hang on to power, or was he simply intervening because he knew that his country would then be finally invaded by the Western allies?
So, if Haughty's autobiography isn't your go-to for an objective analysis of the period, what is?
Well, are there any objective histories apart from mine, obviously?
Obviously.
Obviously, yeah.
No, but, reasonably balanced and
Yeah.
well-researched.
Well, I really like this book here by Ivan Berendt, which looks at the common features of the region generally during the interwar period, decades of crisis, but he gives Hungary a prominent place, and I think he does a really, really good job. So that's one book I certainly would recommend. Now, what we're going to do here is simply have a picture show, and we're going to be staying with each picture just for a few seconds and moving on before we get down to a little bit more discussion just at the end here. This is simply so we can see what life in Hungary was like during the interwar period. So here we've got people dancing in the street in Budapest in 1923. And a bride.
Wow. Is this a very notable person or just your garden variety bride?
Just a garden variety bride, I think, from, let's see if I can say this properly, Mezőkövesd. I think I said that about right, and Hungarians can put me straight. So Northern Hungary, 1925. Yeah, she looks fabulous, and that headgear is to die for, isn't it?
I mean, you try wearing it.
Well,
You
maybe
have
not me,
predators.
but ladies. Here we've got some villagers in formal costume from the early 1930s. Some peasant women selling bread at the market in Mohacs in 1930. Now, Mohacs, just a reminder, of course, was the site of that absolutely decisive battle in 1526 when the Ottomans had come bursting in. We considered that a little in the last episode. And we're now back in Mezőkövesd with peasant women and girls at the market. Here we've got a peasant couple working during harvest with their belongings next to them, 1930. We can get an idea of the general poverty, particularly in the countryside during this period, fairly basic levels of life. Some women selling fruit at the local market in June 32, again back in Mohacs. Cowboys in sheepskin around a well in the puszta, the large flat plains, a bit, I suppose, like the prairies in Hungary. Farming family in Sopron in 1930. Some ethnic Serbian women still in
Hungary.
Still in the smaller version of Hungary in Mohacs. And some women outside their home in June 32. Baking bread. And here, sadly, Budapest slums in the 1930s.
So all those photos before were fairly rural styles of living, but they were urban as well, and this is what it would look like?
Yes. So Budapest may have been very fancy in the inner city and the grand stuff built during the Habsburg period. That didn't mean that there weren't an awful lot of really poor people working and living in and around it. Here we got some middle-class Hungarians in the 1930s. They would not have looked out of place in Western Europe or North America, I think. And Bauhaus flats. Bauhaus was all the rage in the 1930s for, quote, progressive artsy types. And a Jewish-owned bakery store in rural Hungary. So Grünbaum József. So Grünbaum, clearly a Jewish name there. And on the subject of the Jewish population, this is a recent photograph inside the Dohányi Street synagogue in Budapest, around which all sorts of terrible things happened in 1944 to 5, but more of that in our next episode. But it's a beautiful, beautiful building today.
Breathtaking.
Yeah, really, really worth visiting. It's like a sort of cathedral, really.
Well, a synagogue.
Yeah, yeah, it's a synagogue on cathedral scale. Let's say it like that.
All right. So going back to the life Jews would have had in Hungary at this time, what was the tone? What was the cultural climate like now under Haughty?
Well, there was certainly an anti-Semitic tone to it, and it would be hard to acquit Haughty of anti-Semitism. Did he want to massacre them all? Absolutely not. Right? As we will see in the next episode, Haughty's Hungary was a place that Jews fled to during World War II, not from, although that had catastrophic consequences in the end once Haughty had been overthrown. But that's for the next episode. But there were plenty of far-right parties, and Hungary had its own Nazi party, the Arrow Cross, which Haughty made illegal for a lot of the time, and certainly he kept it out of power. Once he was overthrown, it would be given power by the German Nazis. So there certainly are strong anti-Semitic forces there, and some Hungarian Jews, like this group, turned to Zionism, which was an important political movement then, for which please have a look at the first series we ever did on the history of Israel and the Jews. Well, here we've got Haughty presiding at an award ceremony.
Is he knighting someone there?
Yes, he is.
He really is, like, behaving as a king.
Yes, that's right. Yes, he's the regent, so he's knighting someone, a sort of stand-in for the king. And here he is greeting Papal Secretary of State Eugenio Pacelli, who would later be Pope Pius XII, on his arrival for the International Eucharistic Congress in Budapest in 1938.
There's a lot of controversy around Pacelli.
Yes, a lot. Haughty himself, by the way, was a Protestant, but relations between Catholics and Protestants in Hungary have been pretty good. There's not much confessional divide there even today. Hungarian being such an unusual language that if you speak Hungarian, you're in, right? But Pacelli, there's a ferocious debate around him. There wasn't until the early 1960s when an East German communist playwright wrote a play attacking him and said that he was complicit in, well, it wasn't called the Holocaust then, but the massacres of the Jews during World War II. Whereas until then, the general opinion had been, including amongst surviving Jews, that he'd done as much as he could to rescue Jews. Well, the debate has rumbled on. It became particularly fierce in the early years of the present century amongst historians, when it was really like a placeholder for who would succeed John Paul II as Pope. Would it be a conservative, as in fact happened with Benedict XVI? And that the people who wanted that tended to argue that Pius had done all he could, or a lot that he could anyway, to defend Jews, whereas his detractors tended to be either liberal Catholics or communists and secularists who said, no, he was guilty as hell. And that debate has never really gone away.
All right, back to Haughty and Hungary.
Right. So here he is on a visit to Germany in 1938.
Is he buddying up to Hitler? Was he a fascist also? What is he doing?
Yeah, well, he wasn't a fascist. The term tends to be flexible. Some people accuse him of that. He certainly was pretty right-wing. He despised Hitler as a jumped-up little corporal, but he recognized that Germany was the power that was going to dominate Central Europe. It dominated Hungary's economy, its imports and exports, such as they still were. But he decided to hitch his wagon to Hitler's train because this was the way to get some of those lost territories lost at Trianon, back. Hitler was determined to undo the Versailles peace treaties in general after World War I. Well, if that was going to happen, then maybe Hungary could benefit. It did not work out that way in the end. Here we've got the kind of poster, Nem Nem Socha, no, no, never, that was absolutely ubiquitous in Hungary between the wars. People from far left, through center, right the way through to far right, all tended to believe that Hungary had been very, very hard done by, that the Trianon peace settlement should never be accepted. So we got this map here. And this one showing Magyars and Szekely are basically a variant sort of Hungarian, living both inside the new Hungarian state in the black borders there and outside of it, particularly as we see in Transylvania and a bit further west to the south in Vojvodina. Well, there were still minorities within the rump state of Hungary, and we've got an indication of those here.
So even within the new mini-Hungary?
Yes, yes. Still, because, of course, as we've just said earlier on, it was impossible to draw borders that would not create this kind of situation. Hungary had been pared back absolutely to the minimum, and it still had 10% of the population who weren't Hungarians, and a load of Hungarians outside. So nearly 7% of the population were German, as they were right across Central and Eastern Europe, scattered pockets of German-speaking people. Nearly 2% still Slovaks, and a lot of Hungarians over the border in Czechoslovakia. Still a few Romanians and Croatians and Serbs, and also a lot of people who were bilingual. So 17% of the population spoke German, even if only 7% of that 17% were mother tongue German speakers. So Hungarian was spoken by 96% of the total population in mini Hungary, but it was the mother tongue of just 89%. And a little commentary on that situation here. Assimilation of minorities during the interwar period. The percentage and the absolute number of all non-Hungarian nationalities decreased in the 1920s and 30s, although the total population of the country increased. So some people left and others were simply absorbed and assimilated. Bilingualism was also disappearing. The main reasons for this process were spontaneous assimilation and the Magyarization policy of the state. Minorities made up 8% of the total population in 1930 and 7% in 1941 on the post-Trianon territory, the mini Hungary. So there's reason to believe that absent World War II, that would have continued to decline.
This was quite a dense episode, and we hope you enjoyed it, everybody. Please stay with us for the rest of the series. This is the channel where we at least attempt Olympian judgments handed down from the vast intellect of Mike Pierce, historian, renowned author, and academic. Religion, history, culture, all the complicated mess that has brought us to where we are today, and why it matters to us now.
Yeah, in the next episode, we're going to look at how Hungary got dragged unwillingly into World War II and how it ended for them even worse than they could have feared. So please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, and we'll see you in 2 weeks. Bye-bye, everybody.